All right, ready to rock and roll. Yeah, let's lay it bunching. What's your name?
I'm Harry.
Harry?
Yes.
Right, my name is Nathan. Nice to meet you. Right here.
All right. Good afternoon to you all. I officially welcome you to the historical Cape Coast Castle. My name is Harry. I'll be your guide. The tour is going to take us about 45 minutes. And then throughout this 45 minutes, we shall visit the male slave dungeon, the female slave dungeon, the condemned cell, the punishment cell, the courtyard of the castle, the door of no return, the door of return. And then we finally move after to see the governor's bedroom and hall, see Fort William, Fort Victoria, and then we come back down here to end up our tour. But then before we start the tour, I'll give you a brief history about the castles we have in Ghana and in the transatlantic slave trade in Africa. In Ghana, there are 3 castles dotted along the coast of Ghana. We have St. George's Castle in Elmina, built by the Portuguese in 1482. We also have the Christian-Borg Castle in Osu, Accra, built by the Danes in 1661. And then we have Cape Coast Castle, built by the British in 1665. Elmina Castle, or the St. George's Castle, it is the biggest and the oldest European structure in West Africa. Cape Coast Castle is the smallest among them. But in Cape Coast Castle was once built as a fort, known as the Carolusberg Fort by the Swiss in 1653. Later when the Danes came in for the Swiss and then they took over the fort, the Dutch also came in for the Danes and they also took over the fort. And then through the subsequent Anglo-Dutch War, the British also came in, defeated the Dutch, and then they took over the fort. So it was the British who developed the fort into castle as we see today. Cape Coast Castle as it exists today was built over a period of 300 years. Slavery in Africa. It all started at a time when the Europeans discovered the New World. When the New World was discovered, there were a lot of plantation farms, tobacco farms, cotton farms, which they needed people who are really strong and then they can work in these farms. But at the initial stages, they were using the white Indians or the Native Americans. But then these white Indians or Native Americans, they were not all that strong. So they were dying out of tropical diseases. So they had to look for people who are really strong and then they can work in these farms. So through recommendations, a Catholic bishop called Bartholomew de las Cascas recommended Africans to the Europeans. The Europeans had no option to travel down to Africa. But as they got in here, there was nothing like money for them. Hello, please come in. Are you all welcome? All right. But then when they got in here, there was nothing like money for them to buy human beings. So they had to introduce the better trade system, where they were exchanging human beings with imported goods such as gunpowder, tobacco, second-hand clothing, smoking pipes, mirror, and so many other items. But in slavery in general wasn't in Ghana only, but then across West Africa, from wherever the Africans were captured within West Africa, they would have to walk barefooted to this very castle. But then before they were brought in here, they were first taken to Assin Manson slave market. When you are traveling from Cape Coast to Kumasi, there is a village along the way called Assin Manso. Within that village, there is a river known as the Oche River. That is where the slaves were made to take their last bath. From Assin Manso, others came in here, others might continue the journey to the Elmina Castle. It all depends on who went there to buy who. If it is a British, they move down to this castle. If it is the Portuguese, they would have to continue the journey to the Elmina Castle. And then when they got in here, because different slave masters were working or operating from this side, they were forced to identify every slave. So they introduced a machine called a branding iron. A branding iron is a metal. On top of that metal, the slave master has his name or initials on the metal. All they have to do is to insert a metal stick into fire. So it gets very hot. Once they pick the stick from the fire, they place it straight on their chest, at their arm, or at their back for easy identification. After the branding has been done, they were then separated. The men were held down here. The women were also held in the female slave dungeon. They were held in dungeons because after the branding, ships were not ready for them to leave at that moment. So they had to keep them in dungeons for weeks, for months. They spent a minimum of 2 weeks in the dungeon and then a maximum of 3 months in the dungeons awaiting for their shipment to the New World. Slavery was officially abolished in England in 1807, but then those of the British who were still in the castle continued with the trade till 1833 before it was finally abolished in here. The trade lasted for more than 300 years. So please, I'll pause here and then we start the tour. As we start the tour, please feel free, ask questions as we move along. So please, we're going to start our tour from this very side. We'll be moving down. It's a bit dark in here. The floor is also slippery. So let us take our time and then walk. Please come.
There's 3 hills up here that nobody could fit through. Well, maybe somebody real scared.
Alright. So this side is a male slave dungeon. In this dungeon, we have 5 chambers in here. This side is the very first chamber. We have the rest of the chambers downwards this way. So from here, we shall walk through the rest of the chambers. Each chamber held 200 men in each chamber, but when the whole place is full to its capacity, it held 1,000 men in here. They were not allowed to go out. They defecated, urinated, vomited in the dungeon. They sat and slept around their own mess. They slept on the bare ground. Others were sleeping on top of others. The slaves were meant to lose feelings as human beings. The 3 holes up here, that was the only source of light and ventilation in the dungeon. So sometimes when it rains, depending on the direction of the rainwater, some of the rainwater comes into the dungeon and then washes part of their feces through those trenches we see on the ground like a gutter. It leads to the ocean. The slaves were fed twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Whatever that they were giving to them, whatever that they were giving to them was not to satisfy them, but then just to sustain them whilst they were in here and waiting for their shipment to the New World. There was nothing like light as you see now. The room was very dark. So being in the dark for a very long time, whenever they had the opportunity to move outside, the sun rays affected their eye, and the majority of the slaves became partially blind whenever they were exposed to the sun. Because they were defecating, urinating, doing all sorts of things in here, the end result was malaria, diarrhea, fever, dysentery. So by the time the ships were arrived for them to move, majority of the slaves lost their lives in here. This part of the chamber was known as a strong room. Those of the slaves who were physically and mentally strong, they were held in this upper chamber. The door over here would be locked up. Anytime they needed to serve those of the slaves in here with food, because they were strong, they were aggressive. Nobody came in here to serve them with the food. But then a soldier rather stands up here and then drops the food down here for them to fight over the food. Whilst they were feast, blood, vomit, everything is done on the ground.
That's where your food was dropped down from the fight over.
Alright. So this dungeon was built with bent bricks. So look on the ground, you can see bent bricks all over. Some students from the University of Ghana, they came in here in 1974 to conduct a research work in here. And then when they got in here, they had to excavate the place. During the excavation work, they found chains, shackles, human bones underground. So all these chains and the shackles you saw at the museum, they were all retrieved from this side. After the excavation work, they picked sample of the black sand you see on the ground now. The research was conducted on it, and then after the research, the result they got was that the black sand you see on the ground now contains human feces, blood, vomit, food particles that has been mixed together, which it has turned into black as you see on the ground now. It is because of the excavation works done in here. That is how come we can see the bench bricks on the ground. underground. So over in here, it is more or less like we are standing on the original floor. But in the moment we leave this side downwards, we are no more going to walk or stand on the original floor anymore. From here, we're going to walk on human feces, blood, vomit, food particles left over in the rest of the chambers. Any question, please? Okay, shall we move down? Please watch your lecture. Alright, so this side is a third chamber. On top of this dungeon, there was a church, the first English church or the first Anglican church, also known as the Society of the Propagation of the Gospel, was built right on top of this dungeon. Please let us look at this wall up here. This wall up here was known as a spy hole. You can locate this hole right in front of the church. Anytime the British move in there to worship God, they would have to look through the side and then see how the slaves were faring or doing before they move in there to worship God. But then the big question we need to ask ourselves is that why should they even build a church on top of a slave dungeon? When you visit the Elmina Castle, they also have a church sitting right on top of the female slave dungeon with a quotation, Psalm 132 verse 13, which says that Zion is a Lord's resting place, there she will rest forever. So indeed, if we truly have heaven and hell, perhaps they are trying to teach us about the concept of heaven and hell. I don't see the reason why others must be up there claiming they were worshiping God. Others too were in here dying and suffering. They slept around their own mess. Alright, so like I said earlier on, with the exception of the first chamber, that was where we stood on the original floor. But then from the second chamber down here, we are no more going to walk on the original floor anymore. So when you carefully look on the ground, this is the original floor. This is the original floor. So all these are human feces, blood, vomit left over. So we are no more standing on the original floor anymore. That's like 3 inches. 3 inches.
3 inches.
Easy from the regular floor to here.
Yes.
Oh dear people.
Let's see the very last chamber. Alright, so this side is a large chamber. So as you can see, this part of the chamber, it is a bit brighter as you compare to the rest of the chambers because of this very hole up here. This side of the chamber was known as the sorting room because the slaves were bought by different slave masters. When the ships are in for them to move, they had to sort them out according to their owners. At the same time, also sorted the weaker ones out. The weaker ones will be placed this way for doctors to examine them, and then the stronger ones continues with the journey. After the sorting has been done, the stronger ones wouldn't move back towards the main entrance, but then the exit point from this side was through a tunnel. Behind this wall, there was an underground tunnel, very big and very wide, about 72 meters from this side. The stronger ones would have to move through this underground tunnel. They walk through till they get to the door of no return, where the women can join them, and then they move straight into the ships. But then this tunnel has been blocked for now. It was blocked by the British in 1833, so there is no way we can move through this underground tunnel. But then when we move outside, I'm going to show you how big the tunnel is and where exactly the underground tunnel ends when we continue the tour outside. And then also we have a shrine here, African traditional temple. In the olden days, before the Europeans had not introduced Christianity to Africans, Africans had their own way of worshiping God. They worship God by pouring libation. They believed that